What's going on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our round 2 preview for the AMEX. Gonna get you ready for all of that Friday exposure with a look at the DFS slate, also what we're doing for props and betting. And round number 1 was a resounding success for yours truly. We had absolutely everything hit for the prop and the betting side. We did not miss one single bet that we entered for round 1. That includes all the exposure that we talked about on last night's stream, also everything that we added on top of that on the Patreon page as well, and also a pretty solid start for DFS and for our outrights. But with the 3-course setup, 54-hole cut line, there's a lot of movement that's bound to happen over the next few days. So I guess we'll just focus on the prop and the betting side for now, where you can see the Haotong Lee bets that we took for round 1 ended up hitting against Lamprecht. He won by like 8 strokes, so that one wasn't even close. We also had a hit on Tom Kim going under his 4.5 birdies. I actually paired that up with the DP World Tour prop for round 1, which ended up hitting for us. And then we also had the Eric Cole over, which we took from the pairing last night, that I played with an Akshay Bhatia over 5.5 birdies. So it was about a +5 unit day there, already padding the bankroll heading into the weekend. We still have 3 full rounds to work with. So like I said, this is where we're going to go over everything that you guys need for Friday. Any questions, feel free to hit me up in chat. We'll touch on those at the proper time. We're also going to go through any player deep dives and shots gained metrics that we had from one of the 3 golf courses today, and the prop and the betting side will be towards the very end. So stay tuned if you guys are looking for some exposure detail for tomorrow. We're going to be focusing on the fantasy side first. So the first thing I want to go through before we really start talking details for specific plays is where we want our guys playing for round 2, because it is extremely important that we aren't playing guys at the stadium course. I mentioned that on yesterday's stream that it was going to be by far the hardest of the 3. And even though the Nicklaus Tournament course and also La Quinta Country Club played the easiest that they ever have at this event, or at least one of the easiest rounds ever historically in both cases, the stadium course still played only -1.3. And that's the firm nature of those greens. They were completely resodded before last year's event. And it is a slightly easier scoring average than what we had for 2025, but it's not as easy as what we had before then, when it was a -2.5 to even a -3 scoring average for all 3 days at the stadium course, which made it comparable to Nicklaus and La Quinta when you had calm conditions like today. But you can see that that is no longer the case with the averages that we have towards the bottom. Nicklaus course played -5.25. That's almost 4 strokes easier than the stadium course. And then even La Quinta Country Club also played significantly easier at -4.58. So the bottom 2 tracks, or a vast majority, actually all of my showdown exposure, is going to be in large hill GPPs. And I'm even citing a little bit more towards the Nicklaus course, as it did play about 0.7 strokes easier than at La Quinta. But La Quinta isn't a course that we really want to sleep on. Still a lot of low scores, -8s and -9s that we had at La Quinta today. And on top of that, that's the course where the guys from the stadium course today are going to be playing for tomorrow. And they're going to be lower owned because a lot of them shot even to even over par, as opposed to the other courses where everyone was going nuclear low. And we know that ownership, which we're going to talk through here in just a minute or so, is always going to congregate around the players that played the best, because the stadium course was the hardest out of the 3 of them by the just people leaderboard watching, right? Looking at the current box score, they're going to get a little bit less steam because of that. And because they were at the stadium course, another added benefit for us is that we have the shots gained metrics to work with, which we're going to go through extensively. We do have that for a third of the field. And if we want to try and find some leverage plays that still have a good chance to shoot -8, -9, I actually think La Quinta might be where the biggest edge is for showdown, especially if you're playing in the large hill GPPs, because if you can find some ball striking poppers, some short game regression candidates with those shots gained metrics that we have available at slightly lower ownership numbers than at the Nicklaus course, then of course that 0.7 shot difference matters. That's why the Nicklaus course is where probably 60 to 65% of my exposure is going to be for tomorrow. But La Quinta is where you can find some of those diamonds in the rough, in my opinion. So the weather looks almost a carbon copy to today, by the way. If you take a look at that, a little bit of a breath of wind that comes up in the afternoon, but for the most part, single digits with the wind, and no wind gusts until the very end of the day as well. So when we go back to these averages, because the pin pin locations are not going to change from round to round, we wouldn't expect there to be very much variance with these averages. Maybe the field strength, one of the golf courses having slightly better players than others. I'd say that La Quinta and the Nicklaus courses today probably had the best players on that. So the stadium course might not be as bad over the next day or so, but even then you're talking about like a quarter to a third of a stroke difference at most in either case. So those are the two courses that we want to be centering around. The weather does not look that much different. And we're really going to deep dive these golf courses and what we saw from the averages a lot more when we get to the prop side later on. But as I was mentioning in that weather section there in those potential leverage options on La Quinta, let's go through the ownership at the top, because game theory, playing against the rest of the field is going to be the biggest edge that we have for golf, and especially when it's only an 18-hole sample size, and that variance is going to get ramped up even more than usual. So just like we had for main slate, the top 20 in the ownership is what we're going to break down here. And before I say hi in chat, say hi to everyone that's already said something down there. By the way, any player pool deep dives, make sure to throw them down there now. When we get to the shots gained section is when we're going to do all of those. But just in general, as I'm going through chat here, you guys might want to take a look at the top and notice that there's not any stadium guys here. The first stadium players, Minwoo Lee, that shot -10, still getting a little bit of steam because of that. But it's the Nicklaus tournament guys that we have at the top 5 of the ownership. Henley, the whole way up to a Scotty there. And Harry Hall at La Quinta still getting a little bit of ownership, as he's priced around a lot of guys that aren't going to be usable at the stadium course. You still have a few poppers, like even a Pearson Coody at -10. I have at 11.1%. A lot of the casuals that maybe aren't as in tuned with the PGA Tour are going to click on a lot of those names. But people that have any semblance of a brain, right, that are watching shows like this, you have enough of a brain not to play the guys at the stadium course, but you'd be surprised. And I would say for Saturday's exposure, it's probably going to be even more so the case when people go out on Friday, maybe have a few drinks and really aren't going to be locked in for the lineups that they're entering. But even for tomorrow, I think you're going to see that, and even more so in the more casual contests. And I think if you're playing in like a $250 single entry or, $1,000+ entry, that's probably not going to happen, because those people aren't going to be playing like pure dumbasses. But when you're playing like the big $5 150 max or something like that, or the big $25 150 max, where you have slapdicks that are just throwing in a handful of lineups on the shitter at night, that's where you could find that little bit of an edge. But Showdown, that likely gets a little bit limited. Cash, even more so. The people in cash are a little bit more informed in general than some of your large field GPP pools, and that's why you're seeing some of that effect with the ownership. But like I said, I want to catch up with chat, say hi to anyone that's down there, and then we'll talk through who's getting some steam heading into Friday. We had Rushing Guard in chat. Also, Jose, welcome on in. He said he got the 4th like before the stream even started. You love to see it, Uncle TK. Thank you for that. By the way, if you guys haven't already smashed that like button, go ahead and do so. It helps pump up the numbers and get this out there to even more people, to help them out with their showdown process. And it helps us grow the channel and my business as well. So it'd be much appreciated if you guys could go out there and smack that. We got Steven in the chat, Hooves as well. Minwoo Lee is smooth like Cool Whip. That's a good way to put it. Incredible round to shoot -10, regardless of how easy the course was playing. He said having 100% Scotty in tournaments was winning you all the money early on. It's still probably winning you a lot of money, I'd imagine. But yeah, we'll see how it ends up on Sunday. There could be so much movement up and down that if you're winning all the money now or you're losing all the money now, it really doesn't mean all that much. I'm currently winning a lot of money, but I'm not going to be counting that until we get closer to Sunday. He said Day and Hostler ownership going to be high tomorrow. Yeah, Day, he had by far, if you take a look at just pure shots gained total, because the stadium course was the hardest that you had, he's the leader in shots gained so far. So yeah, his low score, on top of the fact that he's the leader in that category, is getting him some steam. Hostler, though, no, not so much. Hostler's a cheaper option. Even with all the nuclear scores that we had today, it's not like his score standing all that much out. But yeah, Jay, definitely going to be a little higher than the guys around him. What's going on? Damon says, tell you Harry Hall's going to be better, please. One and done, not looking good. Yeah, I wasn't a big Harry Hall guy myself, so I'm not sure who put you onto that play. I will say, though, that it was just one round. I'm pretty sure he played at one of the harder courses as well. He's playing La Quinta tomorrow. If memory serves me correctly, I wouldn't worry about it. I mean, especially the guys that played the hardest of the golf courses. If you shot around even par, it's really not all that bad. And like, for example, I bet Steven Yeager this week to win this event, and he shot -1, which looks terrible. -1 was spawn line with the average at the stadium course. So if he goes batshit low for me, -7, -8 at Nicklaus and then La Quinta, we're going to be totally fine heading into Saturday, Sunday. So So I'm not worried about it. I wouldn't be worried about it either if you're somebody in that case. He said, great analysis. Thank you for that, Monica. I appreciate the kind words. Going on, TJ Slav. He says, can Kevin, you keep it rolling off of today's stats? Your crucial pivot play, thanks to my insight, of course. He said, you have him at 1% in your contest. 1%. Wow, that must have been a single entry or something, right? Where the ownership can be a little bit wonky at times. It was closer to 4 or 5% in the contest that I entered, but we'll take a look at the stats on him later. I'm not sure if we have the shots gained. We'll have to see what course he played. But can he keep it up? I liked the course fit this week, so I don't see why he couldn't keep it going. He said J-Day is going to have a big season. Yeah, he made some equipment changes too, so I'm not going to overreact to the one-round sample yet, but it was definitely a good start. He said LQ's a hidden giggle. Yeah, same thing with the Nicholas Tournament course. Did I expect all the birdies today? Also, do I like Min Woo Lee for an under 69.5? We're going to talk props later, so I'm going to skip your question, but I will touch on the first one. Did I expect all the birdies? Absolutely. This is one of the easiest golf tournaments of the entire year. The courses where you saw all those birdies were the Nicholas course in La Quinta. So that'll probably continue. The issue with the Min Woo Lee, who's on the stadium course, is that was the hardest out of all those courses. So I'll defer a little bit more of that answer until later on, but props and betting will be in about 20 minutes. How were Michael Kim's numbers on the stadium course? We'll look at that when we get to the shots gained section. He said minus 11 is going to be the cut line bold prediction. Might actually be even a little bit lower than that based on what we're seeing so far. But yeah, double digits is squarely in play this week. He said, do you think J-Day is worth running back at an easier course? Could be, right? He's going to be chalky, but you could still play chalk and get different elsewhere. So it kind of depends on your player pool. Like if you've got a lot of guys down low that you're comfortable at sub 5%, then using J-Day is not an issue. However, if you're finding yourself playing 7 to 10, 15%ers in the 6 and 7K range, and you probably don't want to be pairing them up with the J-Days, that's going to be like 15 to 20% owned. So yeah, I think it's a little bit more of a nuanced take on J-Day and what you think about what he did today. We're going to look at the stats. We'll talk about the pros and cons of whether he can keep it going or not. But the ownership's the big downside. And based on the kind of questions that we've gone on him so far, right, I think that's 2 or even 3 people that have brought him up. I have to crank up that ownership number even more probably because it looks like a lot of people are landing on him. But let's talk through the ownership that I have right now. So number 1 is going to be a Scotty Scheffler shooting -9, playing the easiest of the golf courses is going to lead to that. And also because you have a Ben Griffin, a Patrick Cantlay playing the stadium course tomorrow, a lot of the other top end of the 9K range or even 10K players are on the course where no one wants to play them. So because those guys are closer to, like, in my projection, 7 to 10%, a lot of that extra ownership is going to guys like Scotty, and then maybe a Sam Burns. If you have the other players like a Russell Henley, Harris English, we talked about him yesterday, right, as a low-owned value play. He ended up paying that off, so now he's going to be one of the chalkiest players that we have on the slate. If you're playing the Nicholas course, if you're a stud and you played well today, you're in the top 10 of the ownership, like you can see right here. But even some of these La Quinta guys, like a Harry Hall, are still going to be a little bit higher owned. He played the toughest of all the courses, so he's there at even par. But I still have him getting ownership because even par, guys, was just 1 stroke loss to the field. And that's really not the worst case scenario. Like we've somebody, by the way, that was at the Nicholas course. If they shot -4, they had a worse day than Harry Hall did because a -4 round at that course was losing -1.4 or -1.25 strokes to the field. Harry Hall shooting even par was losing like -1.2 strokes to the field. So like I said, slightly better rounds, but a lot of people aren't going to be framing it that way. So I still have him getting some ownership, but probably not enough based on the kind of projection that he brings to the table. Ludwig Gobert playing the Nicholas Tournament course. By the way, he won a collegiate event at the Nicholas Tournament course with Texas Tech. I believe it was one of the bigger events that you had of the year as well. So more on that later. I love Gobert for tomorrow on that course that he's had that win on at the past. And from the prop side as well, we're going to be taking a look at that on Prize Picks later on. But you can see down towards this range, there are a few 7K range guys that are starting to sneak in. For the most part, your top 10 in the ownership, at least for round 2 showdown, is going to be all 9 and 10K players. We don't have placement points in play, so it's not like a Sunday showdown slate where if the 54-hole leader is out by 5 strokes, he's going to be like 30, 40% owned, even if he's in the 7K range. That's not the case here, right? Like you're still getting some steam on your JT Postins at $7,900, your Pearson Cooties at -10 at about 11%, but they're not going to be in that 20 to 30% range like they would with those placement points being in play on Sunday. So still guys that you have to keep in mind, especially these guys playing the stadium course, like they're just automatic fades for me to begin with. But especially when I have them at 10 to 11% owned in large field GPPs, there's a Jason Day who I only have at 10.2%. I definitely have to ramp up that ownership number. Just in hindsight, it's probably something I'm going to need to edit after we get off the live stream here. With the questions that we've had about him, $8,000 -9 playing the second easiest golf course, I'm probably going to have to put him closer to 18 to even 20%. So that'll likely take away some of the ownership from some of the other guys around him. Maybe like a Kurt Kitayama will be bumping down a percent or two. Who else? Like maybe a Norin, the Pendriths of the world. Those sort of guys are probably going to have to adjust 1 to 2% in the downward direction. So I'll be checking that out after we get off the live stream there. But another player that'll be in that top 10 to top 15 of the ownership. You got a couple other 7K guys showing up, a Nick Taylor at the Nicklaus tournament course, a Ricky Fowler, $8,200, and then even an Akshay Bhatia, who didn't have the best day, -4. Again, a worse round than Harry Hall in terms of shots gained. And a lot of people aren't going to be looking at it that way, is getting some steam down there in the 7K range. So pretty predictable stuff. Maybe not as predictable as Sunday, but still you're starting to see a lot of the people playing the guys that played well. And in the 6 and 7K range, the ownership starts to spread out even more than we have up top. So like your low owned guys up top are all the stadium course guys, but like your quote unquote low owned La Quinta guys up top are like 9 to 12% owned. Your high owned guys, your second highest owned player on the slate, in fact, I've got it like 18 to 19%. So up top, the spread, the percentage difference from player to player, from your low owned to your high owned guys, is only like 1.5x, right? Going from like 10 to 12% up to this 18% mark. Whereas when we get to the 7K range, you've got players down here like a JT Poston that are 12.8% owned. You've also got players in the 7K range within $500 of Poston that are going to be like 2 to 3% owned and playing one of the two proper golf courses. So that's why these players are bigger fade candidates than the ones that we have at the top end of the pricing, because they're not as good to begin with. They're not as solid of plays. They're not as consistent as the 9 and 10K players, but also the percentage difference in ownership from player to player is just so much larger than what we have at the top end of the board. So even though there's not as many 7K guys showing up on the sheet right here, because it's the top 20 of the ownership, numbers 20 through 40, we're going to start to see a lot of those 6 and 7K guys showing up. You really want to be fading a lot of those high-owned players, because without a massive weather edge, we still have 2/3 of the field that's going to be in play for Showdown tomorrow. Game theory is going to be the biggest edge that you can possibly generate. But on top of game theory, we also want to make sure that we're building a proper player pool. And that's where we're going to be taking a look at some of the stats for tomorrow. So we only have the stats from the stadium course. It's only for the La Quinta guys. So these ball striking poppers and short game regression candidates that you can see over here towards the right. By the way, these are my player pool tags. These are all the rhymes and reasons that I have for getting to players tomorrow. They're only going to be for some of those slightly lower owned guys at La Quinta. But because I have so many Nicklaus tournament guys that in my player pool, and you want more of them. It's the easiest of the 3 courses, right? You'd be crazy not to play a lot of the Nicklaus tournament guys. I'm using a ton of high upside players. We don't have stats to use for them. So there's just no way, right, to find ball striking or short game regression candidates from that side of the field. So I'm really leaning into high upside players, guys that make a lot of birdies. I'm leaning into course history where I can, guys that have played well at the AMEX and especially the Nicklaus tournament course. And Aubert is probably the greatest example of that with his past win at this event in college. But I've also got some good POA overseed putters down here as well, because with only the high upside and course history players, I didn't have a big enough player pool and a big enough percentage of my player pool coming from the Nicklaus tournament course. And rather than just picking names out of a hat like a lot of people will do for Showdown, I like having a rhyme and reasoning for everything that I'm doing. So I'm not just throwing guys in there for no reason. And because we have 156 players in this tournament, and we're going to have 156 players for round 3 too, because the cut is not happening until after Saturday. You need ways to find players. You can't just be picking them out of a hat, or else you're going to be picking out the entire player pool of all the guys that are low owned. So we will be taking a look at the stats, but having a process outside of those shots gained metrics is especially key for this. It's key for any slate, having a more well-rounded process and getting to players that are a little bit more outside the box, but especially when we don't have the stats from the main golf course that you want to be targeting. So just something to keep in mind. And your process for getting to plays doesn't have to be the exact same as mine. I point these out just to show you my process and that I do have a process for finding all of my plays, but you can tinker it and, take things out, add things to your liking of what you like to find in your plays. But having it drawn out, having a way to, know exactly why you're on certain plays is just going to clean up your process. Going to take a lot of those nasty plays out of there that are doing you a lot of harm and likely give you better long-term results. So every single player on this spreadsheet, by the way, that I have in my player pool, I have the rhyme and reasoning behind it on there so that you not only know who I'm playing in the large field GPPs, but also the why behind it as well. Because, what good is advice if you don't know the why behind it? You could be just, getting crap advice from somebody and really not know the difference. I don't give crap advice. I obviously, I would say you could trust what I'm putting out there, obviously, but I don't make you trust that, right? Like I put out the rhyme and reasoning behind it so that there's no questions behind it whatsoever. If you agree with that rhyme and reasoning, you can see why I'm on that certain play, then obviously go out there and tell them for yourself. So something that I think a lot of you guys can learn from to clean up your process and get onto a better player pool. It's something that I found a lot of success with myself. So to download the sheet with all my ownership projections, 6 and 7K range completely included on there, my entire player pool, also all my projections for round number 2, check out my golf DFS tier on my Patreon page. There's a link in the description of the video to go out there and join that. And now let's go through what we're doing in round number 2 with the player pool. So this is where we're going to go through the shots gain metrics, any sort of player pool deep dives that you guys have for me in the chat. Unfortunately, though, only a third of the field is going to be able to be gone through on here. And because these are all guys that are playing La Quinta for tomorrow, I'm only taking really the most extreme examples in ball striking or short game regression. I'm not going down to like the top 10 or top 20 players in this category because we're only talking about a third of the field. And I don't want too many players on La Quinta tomorrow when the Nicklaus tournament course is looking like it's going to be the absolute nuts. But there are a few players that were kind of standing out on here that I do want to go through together. So before we go through the questions, I do want to point out some of those guys that kind of stand out from this perspective. One would be Austin Smother Me and Money at the top end of the board. Somebody that 2 to 3 years ago was a mainstay on these Showdown streams. When we were a much smaller channel, had less than 1,000 subscribers. Austin Smotherman was somebody that we were talking up here to 10 to even 20 live viewers at a time. It was not quite as big of an operation as what we have today. But Austin Smotherman is a striper. He hits the ball a long way. He's a really good iron player, and he's a streaky putter. And today, you can see the first 2 strengths of his were there. The off the tee play and the approach play, but he wasn't able to make any putts, or at least not enough putts, losing 0.5 strokes to the field. So this is somebody that would check that ball striking box emphatically. Not quite a short game regression candidate. Like losing 0.5 strokes to the field isn't quite terrible enough to make that sort of section on my player pool. But in terms of this ball striking, La Quinta at what'll be probably sub 3% ownership because he's down in that 6K range is certainly somebody that I'm using in some lineups. Since he's more of a large field GPP play, like you wouldn't be using him in single entries or cash or anything. You'd be getting much too cute going to somebody like Smotherman. It's just got too low of a floor for that sort of a format. But large field GPPs where we need that kind of upside, if you can get us a spike putting performance or something like that, that would be pretty sweet there. So a Smotherman, somebody that I'm using in some lineups, but a Zicheng Dao also stands out. 4.3 shots gained ball striking today. Did gain a stroke putting, but that's, again, it's not too much of an outlier in either direction where you have to worry about it too much. Denny McCarthy gained 4 strokes ball striking, including 2.86 strokes on approach. A slight loser on the greens, too, is a bit of a red flag for him. Somebody that's usually one of the best putters on the PGA Tour, so we would expect him to be better than slightly losing in this sort of a field. But a JT Poston, one of the best ball striking days. A Max Homa, too, he gained nearly 3 strokes on approach. He did gain 2 strokes putting, but that's not like the biggest red flag in human history. Like if this was 3 or 4 shots gained putting, then maybe I wouldn't be using him for tomorrow. But Max Homa still in play with him gaining 3 strokes approach. That was one of the best numbers that we had on that golf course. And then that's kind of where I'm cutting it off. There's 1 or 2 other players on this list that I'm using as ball striking candidates, but I'm not going down to like this 10 to 15 range like you would normally see. And that's just because of our reliance on the Nicklaus tournament guys. And then if we want to look at the shots gained putting, guys that spiked in either direction, if you gained a whole bunch putting, that will be a bit of a red flag on players. And you can see J-Day gained over 5.5 strokes between the around the green and the putting. So to get back to that question before and like whether I would personally want to go to a J-Day, absolutely not. He's going to be chalkier than what I was personally imagining. I'm going to have to bump him up from that 10% mark to closer to probably 18%. And with this sort of short game reliance, I'll just take my chance on other players around him. And if he ends up going nuclear low multiple days in a row, then I guess so be it. But it's just not something that I'm really going to count on from that. And especially J-Day at this stage of his career, right? If he was number one in the world, it would be different. If this was a Scotty Scheffler right now, it'd be different. It wouldn't be a big enough of a red flag to jump ship, but it is on somebody like J-Day, who is still a well above average player on the PGA Tour, but isn't a world killer is over 40 years old at this point. We also got a Kevin Roy. He gained too much putting, 2.74 strokes in that category is something that might not be as sustainable. And Alex Noren there is a Max Homa at number 4 there. So, if he hadn't been gaining 3 strokes on approach, then we probably wouldn't have wanted to play Max Homa all that much. But this short game reliance, compared with, or I should say combined with, sketchy ball striking stats are guys that I'm actively avoiding. But if we take a look at these players that lost a whole bunch on the greens or even around the green, but that were decent with their ball striking stats, they could be short game regression candidates. So a Charlie Hoffman, who by the way has won this event before, you can see that he lost a little ball striking, 0.4 strokes between his off the tee and on approach, but him losing 4 strokes putting is not likely to happen in multiple days in a row. Rico Hoey didn't hit the ball well. That's extremely surprising, by the way. He's normally a lot better than that, losing the 1.3 strokes there, but he lost about 5 strokes in the short game category. So that's also something that's likely not going to happen again. John Vanderlaan hit the ball reasonably well, about an average day, but lost 3 strokes short game. That's not something that's going to happen every single day. But an Aldrich Potgieter, somebody that I bet outright this week, I was expecting a lot more from. The +1 is ugly, right? Especially when you see all the -6s and -7s around him. But he played the hardest course. It's 2 shots worse than the average. It really wasn't the worst round that we could have possibly seen. And he gained ball striking. He gained off the tee, lost a little on approach, but he lost about 3 strokes in the short game categories. That's where it all went wrong today. And Potgieter is somebody that can kind of go up and down with those 2 categories. If he flips this from losing 3 to gaining 3 strokes, he goes from shooting something like a +1 to shooting something like -7 or -8 on the easier golf course. So those are a few players that you might see in my player pool. Potgieter for sure. Hoffman's, Hoey's, Vanderlaan's in contention for me as well in my lineups. But that's only a third of the field that we're able to break down there. So to go back to the leaderboard, we have all these other players that we have no idea how they played for today. So you better have a process outside of just what you have for the shots gained metrics for building your player pool. And you mentioned high upside players, course history. Course history, of course, just to go back to the spreadsheet from before, that's something that you guys can easily find if you guys are part of my Patreon page. Not only do we have the projections that I showed before, but we also got event history over here for every single player that's teeing it up. So that would be really useful for that. But for high upside players, something that you guys can find on Bet the Number, actually, that I actually think is going to be a little bit more useful at this time of year, is if you go over here to the round props tab, and let me make sure I'm sharing the right one. It looks like I am. You click round props, and then you scroll down here towards the bottom. We can change this to, like, let's say the last 48 rounds. Let's give it a pretty big sample size so that we can see how guys played maybe the last 4 to 6 months of 2025. Sort it by birdie average. And then now we have the most aggressive players that make the most Draftkings points here at the top. Sadier played a lot of his golf on the DP World Tour, so we do have to take some of that data with a bit of a grain of salt. But Scotty's number 1. There's Harry Hall. Somebody asked about his potential for a bounce back. He's always got that bounce back in him with how many birdies he's typically posting. And these are like some of the high upside players that you can mix into lineups. And, some of the studs are going to be pretty obvious plays, like a Kurt Kitayama, Scotty, of course, on the Nicklaus tournament course. But like Patrick Rogers of the world, like you probably didn't think that he was going to be at the top of the birdie list over the last 48 rounds. I know at least I didn't. And you can see him up there. Matt McCarty, Rico Hoey, Kevin Yu. That's part of the reason why I really liked Kevin Yu at this sort of a golf course. Just functionality that you can customize here and Bet the Number. And like we could have done last 36 rounds if we wanted to. We could have kept it at the last 24, which is the baseline over there. And because we don't have stats like for 2026 that'll be reliable, we only have 1 week in 2026, only the Sony Open before this week. So like it'd be really silly to look at the 2026 stuff. But even if we look at the 2025 stuff now, it might be a little bit too long range to be looking at on a lot of these players. So that's why having an ability to sort it by something like the last 36 or the last 48 rounds that you have here and Bet the Number, it's going to be especially useful for this sort of a slate. So Scotty's still number 1 over the last 36. There's probably not too many sample sizes that we could even pull. Scotty's not going to be number 1. But look at that. Rogers number 2, Meissner number 4 down there. You find some of these guys on the proper golf course, and they could really be plays for Showdown and even from the prop and the betting side later on. So that's what I mean by having that more well-rounded process and having ways to get to players that aren't just the shots gained metrics. Also on that spreadsheet before, I meant to mention this when I brought it up. Sorry, I'm going back and forth so much, but I do want to make sure I'm putting it out for people that are already my members. You want to take a look at the guys that are good on Poa Overseed. This can become a little bit of a putting contest because of how easy the scoring is. Well, I've got that for all my members on there as well. So, having a database, having a spreadsheet like mine, like you can see right here, is so useful on a slate like this to go out there and build a well-rounded player pool when we don't have the shots gained metrics to work with. So let's get to those questions, get to any deep dives that you guys have for me in the chat. And then afterwards, we can go through the prop and the betting side. And I promised you guys we'd try and add on one that's on top of what we did for round number 1, where we cashed out on literally every single prop that we got to. Just maybe another 5 minutes, 10 minutes until we get to that. So sit tight if you guys are waiting on that exposure. And I've already entered some stuff for tomorrow. So we're going to be hopping in onto tails right away on that side. Excuse me there, guys. Let me catch up on chat and get over some of these player deep dives I know you guys had for me before. Let's see. So we had the question about J-Day. We already went through his stats before, so we'll probably not deep dive him. But let's see if Kevin Yu played the proper golf course today. I'm actually not sure. I don't think he did. If he did and he went super low, would have been great. But yeah, his -6 round came on one of the easier golf courses without shots gained. So unfortunately, that's not something that we're going to be able to look at stat-wise. Let's see. Looking for some of the other ones. How are Michael Kim's numbers on the stadium course? It's a good question. Let's see. So Michael Kim, he lost ball striking, and then he gained 1.2 strokes with the putting. This is a 3 out of 10 stat profile. It's pretty terrible, if I'm going to be honest and just completely blunt about what we're seeing here. We want the exact opposite in a perfect world. We want them gaining ball striking. Those are the most consistent categories that we have in golf. And we want them to potentially have some short game regression that we can squeeze out of it as well. And if anything, we might expect it to go the opposite direction in both cases. So yeah, 3 out of 10, unfortunately. Not unplayable, though. He's going to be low owned. Because of that, no one's really going to be getting into them in their process. So if you're playing a large field GPP, there's a time and a place for using somebody like a Michael Kim. But I wouldn't be doing it in single entries. That would be getting way too cute. And cash lineups, he'd be like the opposite of the kind of play that you want. You want guys that are a little bit more reliable in that kind of circumstance. Let's see. Yeah, to further answer the question about the J-Day stuff, yeah, probably wouldn't go for the bounce back just because of that ownership. And then can we look at the Sam Stevens ball striking stats? We absolutely can. Let's look at that. So Sam Stevens, -8. So we're not going to have the stats to go through because it was on the easier golf courses. You can see towards the right, though, you do have the fairway and the green percentages that we can use for these players. He hit 64% of his fairways. That's field average. I think dead on the field average, actually. And then he missed 1 green. So he hit 17 of his 18 greens of regulation. So although we don't have the shots gained approach stats, you'd have to imagine that he hit the ball pretty well on approach if he only missed 1 green on the day. So that would probably give you some stats on that. You said J-Day steaming. Yeah, I'm definitely going to have to update that, by the way, because 10.2%, I mean, even that surprised me when I saw that, and I don't think he's going to be close to that 10%. He said J-Day gets it done in Aronimik. That'd be a good story. He said come north, Luke, as well. I told you, I'm planning on it. I just got to get my flights booked and whatnot, but let's definitely get together and have a beer at least once when I'm up there for that. Yo, Luke, can't wait to see some of the favorites just got here. Appreciate everything I do. I appreciate that. You said round 1 was heat. Can't argue with you on that one. We didn't miss anything. Denny gaining 4.1 shots tee to green and losing with the putter 59 watch tomorrow. Kind of looks like it, right? It's perfect shots gained profile. It's the opposite of a Michael Kim. Like should go in the opposite direction in both cases. So yeah, he's going to be in 59 watch if he's -3, or in the case of Tom Hoagie today, -6 through 6 holes. There were some guys that just went on nuclear heaters on that Nicklaus course. And I think it was the beginning of the back 9 that really, really played easy, where you saw some of those guys make 5 or 6 birdies in their first 7 holes. Maybe he'll do that tomorrow. Who knows? Yeah, he said Denny missing a 3-footer was a sight. Yeah, I haven't been going hole by hole as much on a lot of these players. I've been trying to kind of just set it and forget it with the shot tracker as much. Especially on a week like this where we only have the shot tracker on one of the 3 rounds. But yeah, him missing a 3-footer, going to happen once in an event at most. So you'd have to think he goes in the positive direction. Did I get a chance to see Willie Z much today? Surprised where he ended up coming back from injury. Yeah, kind of surprised me too. He shot -7. It was the cupcake of a golf course. So we do have to take it with a slight grain of salt. But they didn't show much on the broadcast. We didn't get to see a lot of his round, but you'd have to imagine it was just a ball striking fest. I mean, that's Will Zalatoris at his best. This is a golf course where he has played well in the past, but I'm honestly really happy for the guy. I did not expect him to play this well right off the bat. You wouldn't expect anyone to play this well off the bat. Like Billy Horschel came back from injury, dog shit for a month. Jordan Spieth comes back from injury, pretty dog shit his first couple starts, at least compared to his standards. Willie Z -7 today is well above his standards. So, like I said, good for him. Did not expect that. I hope that we get to see more of him over the next couple of days. So, because it would be really good to have a barometer on where his game is. Because I don't think any of us really know where he's at this point. He said he made it back. Way to cash the Cole parlay. There you go. And yeah, nice to have you back on the live stream. I know we had you yesterday. Let me know any questions that you've got. Sending a nip or taste of blends, bro. Dude. Cheers to you. I've got water for tonight. The blend sounds damn good, that's for sure. He said, use awesome. I agree. I hope he can keep it up for us. Can I deep dive Harris English? I absolutely can. I don't think we have stats on him, though, because he played the easier course. And yeah, you can see he played at, I believe it was La Quinta today. Yeah, La Quinta today. And that's why we don't have those stats. However, we do have his fairway percentage, about the field average. And then the 72% green regulation percentage was actually slightly worse than average at that golf course for today. So I don't know, like not the worst stat profile, but not as good as a Sam Stevens. Like hitting 17 of your 18 greens is especially impressive. Talk me out of Dumpy Bo 60-1 after a -7 on the stadium course, or don't hook them. I don't really want to talk you off of this, especially if you're a big fan of Texas, but I am going to at least say this. It's Dumpy Bo. Do I have to say anything else? Right? I think we'll just leave it at that. It's Dumpy Bo. Betting him is usually a donation. Usually, though, we'll say that because it's a donation until it's not. And 60-1 is a pretty good number on that. Okay, so let's go through building a lineup, but then we're going to get to the prop and betting side, like I said. And it's not rocket science for round 2 showdown. Unlike round 4, where we got to consider placement points and using guys at the top, we really just have to make sure we're not going to duplicate ourselves a million different times. That's going to be our main priority when we're building our GPP lineups, and then getting some leverage in there too so we can move up in our lineups too. So eliminate the stadium guys. Make sure you're not using any of the people playing on the shitty golf course, and then get a couple sub 10%ers in there. Maybe 2 of them in a lineup and be good to go in some of the large field GPPs, especially because the showdown contests, at least at this time of the year, aren't as large as what we have for the main slate in most cases. And especially for round 2 showdown. Rounds 3 and 4, sometimes they ramp it up a little bit larger. But round 2, the contests are going to be a little bit smaller. So 2 sub 10%ers should probably get the job done for you. So we're going to go ahead and start with a lineup without Scotty Scheffler. If you use Scotty kind of like we had for the main slate, because he is $14,200, it almost forces you on to low-end guys at the bottom because our average salary is now $7,160 remaining. And it's not as interesting for us to go through this kind of lineup construction for the large field GPPs because we don't have to do as much to get that differentiation. So instead, we're going to start with an Aubert lineup where now we have $8,000 remaining, and some of these 8K options are going to be a little bit more interesting from the game theory angle. So we're going to use an Aubert, we're going to use a Hall, who is still getting some ownership, but he's not one of the mega chalky guys at the very, very top. Go into the 8K range now, and maybe rather than taking somebody that's going to be one of the highest owned players here, this is where we start to try and get a little bit of differentiation in. And I do want to take a look at my player pool on the other tab so that I'm making sure that I'm not clicking in anyone that's playing the wrong golf course, because that's really easy to do, guys. With so many players in the field, like if you don't have the people playing the proper golf course in front of you, it's really easy to make that kind of mistake. And that's coming from somebody that nerds out over the shit literally 24/7. It's quite literally my job to know where these guys are playing. And even I have to have that to go through. So on that spreadsheet before, by the way, all those projections, it has where guys are playing. But like in the 8K range, for example, we could go to maybe like a Davis Thompson. He's playing like Quinta. Ricky Fowler's playing the Nicklaus Tournament course, and I've got him at about 10% owned. So let's take Ricky Fowler just because he's playing the Nicklaus Tournament course. We've got Nicklaus Tournament, La Quinta, and then also a Nicklaus Tournament guy here with Ricky Fowler. And I probably want at least 4 Nicklaus Tournament guys per lineup. And I don't think it has to be like a hard rule that you set in your optimizer per se, but like a 60-35 split or 65-35 split between the 2 different waves is probably the best way to approach this. So for our top end of the 7K range option, I'm going to make sure it's somebody playing at the Nicklaus Tournament course. And there's actually not a whole bunch of guys in that range that I like playing the Nicklaus Tournament course. So we're going to use an Akshay Bhatia at $7,700, who is playing that track. Now we're at $7,500 remaining. What course is Hoey playing? One second. He's playing La Quinta. If he was playing Nicklaus Tournament course, he'd be the nuts with that short game regression that we're expecting. But let's go to what Kevin Yu, a high upside player, one of the better birdie makers that we have at $7,500. And in this sort of lineup, you can see because we don't have a bunch of the guys that went off at the stadium course in here, and we have a whole bunch of Nicklaus Tournament guys also that don't have the shots gained metrics. These are all players that are going to project the best. They're playing the best golf course imaginable. And because they didn't play the best golf out of anyone in the field, none of the guys here are chalk. Like, sure, and Aubert is over 10, 15% owned because he's at the top end of the board. Hall's in that same sort of range because he's in that 9K range, but they're only getting ownership because of where their price tag is. And when you get down to like the Fowler, the Bhatias, the Kevin Hughes, they're average to slightly below average ownership. And because the contests aren't 50 to 100,000 entries in most cases for this round 2 showdown slate, when you've got a sub 10%er like you in there, a Bhatia who's going to be a little bit under 10%, and then assuming your last man in here, let's talk about that, isn't like a Will Zalatoris, who's probably going to be the chalkiest guy that we have at $7,500. Take anyone but a Willie Z as your last man in there, and you're going to be in a beautiful position for the large field GPPs. And obviously make sure that they're not playing the stadium course. That's always going to be the case with the last man in that you go with. But because DraftKings frowns upon you actually clicking out a whole set of 6 players, we're going to leave it at those 5. And just like I said, don't use a super chalky player as your last man in there. And you're going to be totally fine not to duplicate yourself and to have the leverage that you need to move up in those GPPs as well. And you can see it wasn't terribly difficult to get to this sort of. If we had a few other chalky guys up top, like maybe our life would have been a little harder towards the very bottom, but not that much harder. We got 2 sub 10%ers in there, and we're going to be totally fine, like I said. And that's really what you want to be worrying about when you're building lineups. So that's the DFS side. I hope to see a lot of your names towards the top end of those GPPs. But like I said, make sure to check out that spreadsheet from before over there on the Golf DFS tier for access to everything in my player pool. And I just realized I did it again. This is the uncensored version of my player pool and spreadsheet. So I guess you get to see a couple of the guys that I'll be playing for tomorrow on there that we didn't talk about before. There's Akshay. Who's that one? That's JT Poston, their ball striking candidate. There's Hoey. There's Kevin Yu. There's Will Zalatoris, who I'm still using despite that ownership, by the way. Just maybe not a leverage option in that portion of the board. To download the sheet, though, the reason why we brought this up, make sure to check out the Golf DFS tier. Link in the description of the video. Patreon page is where you want to be for all of that. But now let's go through props, which have been absolutely printing at this point of the week. Like I said, plus 5 unit day today. Can't really beat that, but let's try and see if we can run it back for tomorrow. And the first thing I want to look at is going to be course conditions. The stadium course is going to be the hardest of the bunch. I still think we can go to that course for some fades. Some guys at 4.5 birdies that might make some sense for some unders. But if I'm going to be targeting positive stance plays for tomorrow, the Nicklaus course just stands out like a sore thumb. I mean, minus 5.25 average, 6.41 birdie or better average. And now we're getting a lot of the best players on the field that are going to the Nicklaus tournament course. I actually think that this average might get beaten for tomorrow. It might even be like a minus 5.5 to minus 5.7 scoring average. Wild thing to even have come out of my mouth, by the way, to say that we might have close to a -6 scoring average on the PGA Tour, but that's how easy they set up the pins at the Nicklaus course, and that's the kind of scores that we saw there today. So you'll see that La Quinta at the bottom, you can see some of the scoring averages there as well, was also really easy at -4.58. Because the lines at the Nicklaus course and La Quinta aren't that far off from each other, they're like 0.5 birdies off, or they're like 0.5 strokes off in most cases. That's why I like the Nicklaus course guys just a little bit more. Like, they're playing the easiest course. I'm going to squeeze out as much of that value as humanly possible. And the stroke average difference is about 0.75 or 0.7 strokes from course to course, even though it's only 0.5 off on a lot of the sports books. And you can see the birdie average was also off by about 0.55 from round to round. And even though it's only off by 0.5 on a lot of the books. So even though you're talking about very fine margins when we're mentioning that sort of thing, a 0.5 to a 0.1 birdie difference is massive over an entire season. And the same thing with a 0.05 to a 0.1 stroke difference in either direction. And maybe not so much if you're newer to golf and you're a newbie on these bets. That's probably something that you don't notice as much. But when you're a sweaty tryhard like myself, all of those extra percentage points matter. And let's go through our first piece of exposure for tomorrow. And they got an over on Scotty Scheffler at 7.5 birdies, 5.5 birdies. I wish. That would have been great. Then an under on Ludwig Aubert at 66.5 strokes. So let's start with the Scotty Scheffler one first. It's the world's #1 player playing the easiest golf course that they're probably going to play the entire season. And with the average at about 6.41 per round, like you guys can see here in the middle, he averaged last year, by the way, just under 1 birdie or better gained per round. But Scottie Scheffler plays, for the most part, harder tier events. He plays all the majors. He plays the harder golf courses, the signature field events. He also plays against the world's best players week in and week out. So although his baseline for 2024, or 2025, I should say, sorry, was about 1 birdie or better gain to the field, in this kind of field against a lot of the shitty lower tier players that you have in this 156 player field, he's going to be gaining closer to 1.25 to 1.5 birdies or better per round. And with the 6.41 average, that puts him at nearly an 8 birdie or better projection. Hence why I like the over at the 7.5 number that you're seeing here. And that would be in a vacuum that I would like that sort of an over. Now we've got a Scottie Scheffler coming in off a -9 nuclear round. He was making a shit ton of putts. He's really good on this POA overseed surface. And he knows that this is going to be the easiest course that they're playing in the entire week. And he knows that he's going to have to go out there and shoot a low score. So at 7.5, I think that this is pretty severe line value. And on DraftKings, they have him at 7.5 birdies. Crazy, by the way, that they would even have him at 7.5 birdies, but he's -145 towards the over at that number. So that's over the plus EV line of that -142 that we're looking for in most cases. So if you're telling me we're getting a plus EV value, it makes sense from the traditional analysis perspective. He's playing the easiest course we're going to see all year. And it's world #1. Then, like enough said, like that's a pretty easy over for me to want to get to there. And the putter has to cooperate. I mean, getting to 8 birdies is not just going to get handed to anyone. But if his putter is even around a neutral or him gaining like 1 to 1.5 shots gained to the field, then he's going to have no problems, in my opinion, covering this sort of thing. So give me that over on Scottie Scheffler. And then let's take the under on Ludwig Gobert at 66.5 strokes. So that's shooting a -6 round, which compared to the average is about 0.75 strokes gained to the field. The thing is with Gobert, if you take a look at his season-long baseline last year, is he was averaging about 1.5 shots gained to the field. So him gaining 0.75 strokes is well within that range of outcomes. And just like Scottie, we kind of adjusted him because this field isn't going to be as strong as what he always plays in. Gobert plays in the majors, the signature events, and all the hard events as well. So his 1.5 shots gained on average is probably closer to 2 shots gained in this sort of a field. And now here's the real X factor with Gobert. Him gaining 1.5 to 2 strokes from that average would have him at about 65, even a 64.5 projection. That's obvious value there. But this is a golf course. If you caught the beginning of this live stream, you know that what I'm about to mention here, but he won at this course in college. He played at Texas Tech, I believe won one of the biggest events that he had in all the college schedule at this very golf course, and he ran away with it. So he has a lot of experience at this course. He's played very well at this course in the past. And although he's only played this a couple times in true tournament conditions, every time he's been one of the best players that you've had in the field at it. So 66.5 strokes. And also, if you take a look at his sportsbook line value, he's -135 towards the under on books, which isn't quite at that -140 mark that you have to start to get to the plus EV line for a 2-leg slip here. But I don't marry myself to plus EV plays. This isn't a plus EV channel. That's just silly. Plus EV prop betting is not really a thing because the markets aren't bet enough for them to be that efficient. To be quite honest with you, it is nice to see that sports lines makers agree with some of my opinions on these things, but it's not something that I'm ever going to marry myself. You've noticed that with the round 1, a lot of our bets were just kind of no-it bets or no ball bets, and it went extremely well for us with hitting every single one. But this is a no ball bet and something that's pretty close to a plus EV line value. Same thing with the Scottie Scheffler one, right? -145, but that's not really the reason that we're getting to it. It was just a pure traditional analysis on his averages from last year. But when you can find both aspects of that, line value and stuff that just makes sense logically, then that's where you find the kind of value that I enter on my Patreon page. So if you guys want to find everything I'm entering on PrizePicks, everything I'm entering on Underdog, on top of this 2-man that we've already entered, you guys can find that on the golf prop and betting tier. You can also find a link to that in the description of the video. The Patreon page, the golf prop and betting tier is how you guys get access to this. Not only every single slip, but also all the averages that you see throughout my content. I publish this for all of my Patreon members first, so they can deep dive the boards as soon as they drop. I also post weather reports for all my members so they know what to expect from conditions. I give some commentary on that so that you know how to adjust the averages going from day to day, but also every single piece of exposure that I'm entering as I am actually putting them in, so you guys can tail any of that before any potential line movement, and also so you guys can see the logic behind my bets so that you can become a better of golf and know how to find a lot of line value for yourself. So I would highly recommend checking it out if you guys haven't already. We're not going to do a complete another review of our results or anything, but plus 5 units on the first day is pretty sweet. Last year our results were plus 56.2 units, and the year before that it was over a plus 300 unit year. So nobody rakes in golf bets like I do. Nobody knows these golf courses like I do, and that's just cold hard facts. There's nobody else that moves lines like I do. And that's the ultimate respect that you can get from these lines makers. And I don't say that to be full of myself. I try to be as humble as humanly possible when it comes to my analysis. But at a certain point, there's just cold hard facts. And that is a cold hard fact with what I just said there. So if you guys want to become part of the Patreon page, become a better of golf and all of our process over here on this side of things, check it out via the link in the description of the video. But I also want to point out this one matchup that I have not entered, and I'm not sure whether I'm going to enter it myself because it completely depends on the kind of odds that we're going to get. Let me refresh this so that we can potentially go through a few of the other lines that we have on here as well. Let's click on matchups. But it was this Harry Hall versus Ryan Gerard. And here's why I like it. Harry Hall is just a better player than Ryan Gerard is. And I have a lot of respect for Ryan Gerard as a player. Ryan Gerard is somebody that has won on tour before, somebody that finished second on the DP World Tours last time out, played really well last week too. But if we take a look, let's just go to like the last 48 rounds and compare these two players. Harry Hall was one of the best players in the world last year. So when we compare these two players over at least the 48 round sample size, Harry Hall wipes him. I mean, he's 1.59 shots gained better per round. But even if we zoom in, Harry Hall's played his best golf, or I should say not Harry Hall, Ryan Gerard has played some of his best golf over the last couple months. It's a 1.41 shot difference between these two players. So at minus 125, I would probably bet that if I could get the same sort of odds on Hard Rock Bet. But if they give me a better number than this minus 125, like maybe minus 120, minus 115 towards a Harry Hall, then I'm going to be nuking that on Hard Rock Bet. But unfortunately, Hard Rock Bet is extremely slow to posting their boards. We're never really going to have the odds to look at here on live stream together. So I'll have to see whether we can get anything comparable, if not better, than the Harry Hall prop here on Draftkings. But yeah, this minus 125, I would bet if I had access to Draftkings just for 1 unit at this minus 125. If it's a better number, maybe that's where you increase your unit size and whatnot. There were a couple other bets that were kind of standing out. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of spitball those here. It's all going to depend on the numbers I can get and whether I'm actually going to bet any of these or not, because I'm somebody that will only bet something if it actually makes sense. I'm not a degenerate that just enters shit for the sake of it. If you are, then by all means, all the power to you. You can go out there and have some fun if you want. But if you want something that's more sustainable, then you want to be a little bit more stringent and disciplined about what you're entering. But like a Denny McCarthy with his ball striking versus the struggles of Michael Kim, that one kind of stood out to me when I was going through this board a little bit earlier. There were a few other ones on here too, and they were mostly towards the bottom, if I remember correctly. A Smotherman at plus 100 with his ball striking stats versus a Shipley who's really struggled the last couple weeks. I love Shipley. He's a fellow Pittsburgh guy like me, but Shipley was terrible at the Sony. He's been pretty shaky the last month or so on tour in general. So that's why he might be a little bit exploitable there. But there was another one on here too. Let me see if I can find it. There's so many different matchups, of course, because it's two sums and there's 156 players. The selection is kind of nice, though, I will say. It gives us at least a lot of bets to go through. This was another one too. The Max Homa versus Brian Harman. Max Homa has been playing really good golf over the last couple months, especially during the fall swing. Brian Harman made 7 straight bogeys his last round at the Sony. He also really struggled his back nine today. He hit the wrong golf ball, hit an amateur golf ball at one point, which is inexcusable. I mean, it's just like kind of funny that he would make that kind of mistake. But he did that, and he also made, I believe it was a double bogey on the hole after that. I was just chipping the ball terribly. Max Homa probably shouldn't be even money against the Brian Harman on that. And I do want to take a look at the shots gained. I actually don't think it's going to be favorable towards Homa here because, I mean, Harman's been pretty solid too. But I guess it depends on what kind of sample size we use. Let's go to the last 24. That's a pretty good starting point on this. Max Homa is better by 0.9 shots gained per round, a little bit over 0.9 shot difference between those two players. Let's zoom out to the last 48. This is where it's going to become a little bit more favorable for Harman because Homa really sucked towards the beginning of last year. But even then, pretty similar numbers between those two. So yeah, with the struggles of Brian Harmon and Max Homa looking pretty solid from what we saw today, like that's another one that if I could get minus 115, maybe even slightly better odds than that I would enter myself. And then I think that may have been it, but let me finish going through this list just in case there was anything else. Maybe a Sam Stevens versus a Collie. That was another one that I kind of wanted to line shop. So I'll show you the reasoning on that one. Let's go Stevens and then Collie over here towards the right. If we zoom out to the last 48 round sample size on these two players, it's kind of close. It's 0.19 strokes versus 0.09. And I think it was the last 24 that the really big differential came in. I guess not. So that's just more of like a talent level thing. Bud Collie didn't make the playoffs, didn't go as far as somebody like a Sam Stevens. So that's why I was looking at that one. But now that we've looked at the shots gained metrics, it's not being backed up as much as those other two plays. And just like we have with the prop of the betting side, guys, I'm only going to bet plays that I properly vet and that I see make sense from a multitude of different angles. And when it doesn't get checked by the shots gained box, then that's enough to usually for me to jump ship on those sort of a plays. Whereas these top two, they checked the logic box and the shots gained box over those different sample sizes. So let's be smart about it. Let's cut down the plays to the ones that stand out the most. If you want to fade Will Zalatoris, I guess I could see it. I mean, he's beating Akshay's ass right now. So, we'll see how that works out for us with that tournament matchup over the next couple of days. But Daniel Berger versus Will Zalatoris, he's a minus 125 favorite. If you were giving me Daniel Berger as the underdog, I'd play that in a heartbeat. But as a minus 125 favorite, I think that might actually be a pretty efficient line that we're seeing on that one there. And yeah, I think that was it. Only a couple other groups that we have to go through on here. I was kind of looking at Vanderlaan versus Zhang Dao as well. Both guys that are graduates from the Korn Ferry Tour. Vanderlaan played well at the Sony Open, but I don't know if he's playing well enough to substantiate playing like this. If this was plus 110, plus 115, and we were getting better than that 50-50 implied odds, then I would probably take a John Vanderlaan on that. But I'm not sure he's worth taking at exactly that 50-50 coin flip. So these will be the two that we point out for the live stream here. If I can get the same, if not a better number, I'll be adding them over there on the Patreon page. But for all the different betting bets and any sort of matchups that I'm taking for round number 2, you guys can find that on the Patreon page as well. If you guys are down in South Florida or even Florida in general, and you have access to Hard Rock Bet, you'll be able to tail the same kind of exposure that I have over there. But oftentimes, these matchups are the same on the other websites. You're able to tail them over there as well. So if you're on Draftkings, Fanduel, BetMGM, Bet365, you name it, all the different websites that they have around the industry, you usually have some exposure to tail on those sort of websites too. But I do cater it towards Hard Rock Bet. That's the website that I have the most access to and that I can enter full units on down here in South Florida. So that's what my content's really going to be catered around, because there's nothing I can't stand more in this industry than people that put out content for betting in DFS and that don't do it themselves and don't bet and don't play the DFS lineups themselves. Why are you wasting your time making content, doing all of this for something that you're not passionate about and something that you're not actually putting your money behind, when your content, in a lot of cases, a lot of the big names in the industry that aren't even putting money behind their certain plays, that are getting people to tail them, even though they're not having the consequences of winning and losing themselves. Like, that just feels so unethical, so terrible that you'll never see me do that sort of thing. So my content is just what I enter. Like, if you ask me like, oh, what are my favorite leans on a certain website? I'm just going to tell you to kick rocks most of the time. Like, I'll be super honest about it. I was like, hey, I'm not wasting my time. If I'm not entering it myself, unless it's a quick snap answer, like I can just check it real quick and give you an answer. But that's the kind of content that you want to tail in the industry. Is you don't want to be tailing people that aren't, playing these things themselves, that don't have skin in the game, or else your results are likely going to show that. Their lack of caring and their lack of caring of whether it wins or loses is going to bleed into your results. And if you can avoid that at all cases, then I highly recommend doing so. And am I going to call out the people that do that? Absolutely not. I'm not a drama-filled person, but it's really easy to figure out who those people are. If they don't show bet slips, if you don't see them in GPPs all that often, then you probably know who you're dealing with in that department. But you won't get that around here. You guys will know that everything we're going with is going to be bet, and bet more than likely, I shouldn't say 100% of the time, because every once in a while there's some whales out there that'll tail my plays. They're maybe entering them for more than I am. But like, when you're seeing me enter something on like Prize Picks or Underdog, I can personally guarantee you that in 99.99% of cases that I've got a lot more exposure down than you do on them. So if they're winning, they're going to feel great. I'm going to win quite a bit of money on them. But if they lose, I'm going to be feeling that myself. And You can't say that about everyone else that we have in this industry. So if you guys want to tail all my exposure for tomorrow, you guys can find that on my Patreon page. I'm going to cut it off here at the hour mark. I am going to go over any last second questions that you guys have in the chat, but I am dealing with a massive migraine right now. So my apologies if it was a slightly lower energy stream. Didn't want to be bitching and complaining the entire time though, so you're not going to hear about it until the very end. But do want to make sure I can get off the live stream, get some rest in me before tomorrow morning, so that hopefully we can attack Saturday and Sunday with a full head and full levels of energy as well. But let's catch up on chat before we hop on out of this live stream. And like I said, for the rest of the content for tomorrow, the Patreon page is going to be the place to be on that. Do I like Kirk at plus 100 versus Seabez for the round matchup? So you're getting plus money, the 50-50 implied odds. Let's look at the shots gained metrics, because to me, that's pretty close to a 50-50 coin flip. So I don't think it's maybe the worst bet if you're getting that plus 100 odds on it, but it was Seabez versus Kirky at the plus 100 mark. And you're obviously looking at Kirk for who you want to play. So let's go to the last 48 rounds. I want to zoom out on this one because this is where Seabez is going to be a little bit of a favorite. You can see he's getting 0.76 shots gained per round. I'm curious what happens when we zoom in though. When we zoom in, he's actually an even bigger favorite over that sample size. Plus 100. Let me see what they have over here. Yeah, plus 100 seems pretty solid. He is in a different matchup, so I guess that's a custom matchup that you're getting on that specific book. But yeah, plus 100 makes a lot of sense on that. In fact, if I had access to it, I'd probably be betting it myself. Leaning towards taking Will Zalatoris for the top 10 finish at plus 550 on Hard Rock Bet. Dude looked good today, and the group of 3 guys is only 3 shots back from the leader. So looking at a top 10 finish at plus 550. So here's the only concern on that, man. You're talking about somebody that's returning from injury, and we don't know what his form really looks like. It could be excellent, and that plus 550 could be a massive discount if he's at the full extent of his powers. But usually, and I'm going to put the usually out there because there's always going to be exemptions to the rule. But most of the time when these guys return from injury, it doesn't look that good for at least 2 to 3 starts. We had an exemption to that rule with Alex Noren, exception, I should say. He returned to the PGA Championship for his second weekend and nearly won it last year. But the other 80 to 90% of the time, it usually doesn't work out for them. So plus 550 is a decent odds, at least. It's not like you're taking him at like a chalk number for like a top 20. Yeah, a top 10, which is a decent spike finish there at plus 550. I don't want to talk you off of that too much. I think that's an okay number. Talking about a guy's a really good long-term player, but I do at least want to throw out the injury there because it's at least something you should be considering, because a lot of times it really gets guys. You said you got him at 500 to 1. Let's ride. Yeah, I forget who you were talking about before, Birdie Man, but I think that was Hostler, right? 500 to 1 seems a lot better than 60 to 1. I would like riding that. He said, thank you for all my hard work, brother. Excellent show as always. Appreciate that. He said, seeing Scotty at 64.5 when they dropped the lines had you absolutely shook. Yeah, me too. I mean, 7.5 birdies is still crazy. I mean, like, I can't believe I'm taking the over at 7.5 birdies. Like, a couple of years ago, that would have been blasphemous for me. But you've got to adjust your process for the courses that we're at. So it's just one of the very unique weeks on tour. And it's not even like it's a par 70 and is at 64.5. It's a par 72. It's at that sort of number. He said Clark's plus 100 versus Bridgman for the second round matchup. Let's look at that. So I'm assuming that's also not one of those two balls, right? That's a custom head-to-head that you're looking at. So it was Clark versus Bridgman. Let's see. Let's go to the last 24 rounds to start. Clark's the pretty big favorite on that one. And I'm assuming last 48 might flip. So still, Wyndham Clark is the favorite. I'll co-sign that one too. I like both of the bets that you pointed out for us. The 2 balls against Robert McIntyre. So it is one of the custom ones that you can find. But yeah, even money on somebody that should likely be the favorite definitely makes a whole lot of sense. Your Fort Myers and Ponte Vedra over here. I'm down in the Boca Raton area, so down in South Florida. He said, I appreciate it again, Luke. Hope the migraine goes away. You powered through it like a champ. But I've gotten very used to doing that. So I thank you again for the kind words and whatnot, but something that we're pretty used to at this stage, unfortunately. He said, your wife gets them all the time. Nothing you do except lay down in a dark room. I've got a couple of things that help me out, Michael. The thing that helps me the most is getting rid of the light for the most part, but also listening to soothing sounds on Spotify. So like if you go on Discord and you see my like activity on Spotify, it's going to be like soothing anti-anxiety songs that I'm listening to, because I don't know what it is for me that the audio cues really help me out a lot. Akshay over 6.5 birdies. Yeah, he's playing the Nicklaus tournament course, so he has to have a slightly above average day to do so. He is a top 15 birdie maker. I think that's a pretty decent lean chase. In fact, I was looking at that one before we got on live stream here, so I actually like that one quite a bit. He said you're all in on Davis Thompson round 2. I'm definitely not all in on him. So if you're asking me, no, I'm not going to be all in on anyone for round number 2. I will show you his stats, though. I believe he was one of the guys that was popping. So yeah, he played the stadium course. He gained off the tee, gained on approach, and then lost putting. It's like a 6.5 out of 10 stat profile. So Showdown's not the place to go all in on anyone. It's just too variant of a format to trust anyone in like 75 to 100% of lineups. But yeah, I like him a lot more than most players for tomorrow, that's for sure. He said, I had to leave for a bit, but did I ever cover anything on Minwoo Lee? Yes, we did. We covered him a few different times throughout the video. Unfortunately, we're ending the live stream right now, man. I would ask what you're curious about with him, but that's going to be it for the live stream. But I appreciate all you guys stopping by for the live stream as per usual. Smash that like button if you guys haven't already. Also, go ahead and subscribe to the channel so you guys don't miss any of the content to come. Rounds 3 and 4, we'll be doing the same thing that we did here, going over Showdown, also props and betting for Saturday and Sunday's action. So you guys want to be notified when that goes live. Make sure you guys subscribe so you guys get notified when we do that. But that's all I've got, guys. I appreciate your support here, as I said, and I'll see you guys there tomorrow night.